All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Think Wise podcast. So, my dad and I are going to start this new series here on trust. And this is going to be the first episode diving into trust. And so, my dad, he's got a book. It's called Trustology. I have it right here. And ironically enough, I've probably read the first half of the book like 10 times. I'm a terrible reader. I'll always start books and never finish them. And so, I've never actually read my dad's entire book. But I've heard him talk on this topic a lot, and I figured it would be really cool to go through the book. And as I'm reading it in real time, we break down the chapters together and, talk about how we apply them to our lives and other young professionals' lives. And so to get us started, I'm just going to read my dad's bio that's usually read before he speaks at events and everything, just to kind of give everyone context on what he does and kind of his background on the topic of trust. So Richard Fagerlin is the president of Peak Solutions, a leadership development firm dedicated to helping build wise leaders, strong teams, and healthy cultures. Since starting Peak Solutions in 2001, Richard has impacted the lives of thousands of people throughout the United States and has worked with leaders from over 50 countries across the world. As a leading authority on the topic of trust, Richard has been awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award as one of the 100 top thought leaders on trust by the organization Trust Around the World. Others with this distinction are Howard Schultz, founder of Starbucks, Jim Kouzes, best-selling author of The Leadership Challenge, and Stephen M.R. Covey, author of The Speed of Trust. As the author of Trustology, The Art and Science of Leading High Trust Teams, Richard is leading the charge to transform lives, impact relationships, and help people not only love what they do, but who they do it with. With over 20 years of experience in executive leadership and strategic planning, Richard helps to bring focus, clarity, and alignment to teams and organizations worldwide. Richard lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, where he and his wife enjoy the active Colorado lifestyle and with their 4 boys. So, Dad, excited to start talking about this with you. I think right off the bat, there's a quote that I pulled from the first chapter that you say, "Trust is the single most important factor in determining whether a group of individuals will become a high-functioning, high-performance team." So talk a little bit just overall the general importance of trust and why you would say it is the single most important factor.
Well, first of all, it's totally awkward to hear your own bio over and over again. So thanks for navigating through that difficulty. Trust is the single most important thing because in its absence, everything falls apart. So sometimes you look at the positive of a value, whether it's trust, love, care, cash flow, whatever it is. You look at the positive of it. And the positives are good, but when you really look at what's the negative, when you don't have it, that often speaks to really how important it is. So if you don't have trust, you can't have progress. Everybody's rethinking and questioning one another. I like to call trust like the lubricant, or it's the foundation of all relationships. And so most people are going through life every day thinking, is this person that I'm going to interact with, are they benevolent? Do they care for me? Do they have my best interest at heart? And when they can answer affirmative to those questions, that they think that people do care for them and they have the benefit of the doubt, they carry a lot less with them. They carry a lot less pressure, stress, problems. So trust itself is a massive topic, and you probably can't go an entire day without thinking, do they trust me or do I trust them? It's something that is on our mind constantly.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that as I was reading these first couple chapters. I feel like subconsciously in the back of our head, whether or not people are trusting us or whether we trust them is something that we're constantly thinking, not just in professional environments, but especially in personal environments too, with every relationship we have. And I think one thing that at least I overlooked until I read this in the book was the idea that trust allows innovation and creativity to thrive. And I never thought about it that way. It's I think when I think of trust, I think more so of am I comfortable with this person one-on-one? Can I let them into my life? But that idea of innovation and creativity, I think is really profound. And yeah, expand a little bit more on that, what that means.
Well, I think it's related to your ability to take a risk. So nothing great's ever been achieved without some sort of risk. And so when you have trust, you're willing to have the risk, and it takes risk to innovate. It takes risk to, create something out of nothing. It creates risk to challenge one another. And so when you have trust, you're able to take risk. And, the idea is that trust really allows you, when you have trust with people or within groups, it allows you the ability to think differently, and not just to take risks, but just by nature, risk doesn't always mean reward. Sometimes you take a risk and something bad happens. And so, when you know that something bad's going to happen and you might fail, or you're likely to fail, but still you're going to be okay, that makes it so much easier to take risk or to innovate, rather than there's many situations where people don't feel like they can fail, or failure is not an option. If they do fail, bad things are going to happen to them. So their ability to really be innovative and to go that extra mile is super low. So trust allows for that innovation and creativity it's a breeding ground for it to thrive.
Mm-hmm. And then also the idea that low trust, or not giving people trust, wastes time. And that was another thing that I don't think I'd ever thought about before, was how much time do you waste and energy in your own life by being so, afraid of stepping on toes, or afraid of, offending people or letting people in close to you. And I don't know, that really stuck out to me, that, we waste at the end of the day, you waste a lot of time and energy worrying about trust. And so that kind of leads us into the whole idea of trust big lie, which is the foundation of everything you talk about in trust. Mm-hmm. And at least when I first heard it definitely, it took me a while. I was like, what are you saying? Do I even really believe what you're saying there? And so why don't you tell everyone trust big lie?
Yeah, this is really interesting, because the big lie, there's actually two of them. They probably are the most prevalent beliefs about trust. So you have the two things that people believe the most about trust are actually the two biggest lies. The first lie is that trust is something that is earned over time. And the second lie is that it takes a lifetime to earn it and a second to lose it. And so, the idea that something takes an entire lifetime or a long time to earn, but it can be gone in a second, is asinine. The risk versus reward there is not worth it. And the problem isn't in the second part of it. Trust can be lost in a second. We know anything can happen. Someone can break into your house, someone could, shoot your dog, someone can take your idea, and in that second you can lose the trust. That's not the problem. The problem is this idea that it's something that takes a long, long time to get to. And then that leads us to that big lie. And the big lie is that trust is something that is earned. And, I don't know how deep you want me to go into that, but have you seen in your world, at your age, have you seen people say that you got to earn someone's trust, or I can't do something until I've earned their trust? Have you heard that?
Oh, 100%. And I think I heard you first say this back when I was, 13, 14 years old. And even the past 8, 9 years, personally, I have to kind of fight against that natural urge to just tell people that they have to earn my trust, and not actually say that to them, but in my own head, in my own heart, wait for them to earn my trust. And yeah, I think it speaks to our natural inclinations that we have, I don't think we all assume the best in people from the very start. And I think that's right. When I read that it's all about giving trust and not telling people they have to earn it. I think that's right. Really what you're saying, is to assume the best right off the bat. Would that be fair?
Yeah. Well, I think to assume the best is a silver bullet in this idea of growing trust. I also want to clarify. I think that what we have here is a vocabulary problem more than a heart posturing problem. I think that we don't use the words in the same way. So if I can just go back a little bit into this trust is earned lie, I think it's totally reasonable to look at people and think, wow, can I trust them? And it's also perfectly reasonable to think I probably need some greater experiences or more interaction with people in order to know just how much I can trust them. So I'm not saying you just go blindly into the relationship. Matter of fact, when I'm speaking to audiences, one of the things I say is I'm not talking about eyes wide shut trust where you walk out onto the I-10 freeway and cross across 8 lanes of traffic with a blindfold on and just trust you're not going to get hit. That's not trust. That's stupid, right? And so what you're doing in this idea here of trust is something that you actually give to others, is you're walking in confidence with others, expecting the best in them, and you're taking some steps, but you're taking steps. You're not running all the way. And you take a step, you take a step. Now, what typically happens is people, instead of doing that, if trust is something that is earned, they wait for you to do something really good. And when you do something really good, then they put a check mark next to your name and they take a step closer to you. But then they're done. And then they wait for you to do something good again and they take a step. And you keep doing this until all of a sudden someone burns you, does something bad. And what you do is you erase all of those steps that you took towards someone and you go back to the starting place. And it's just this tension of back and forth. And I guess when I say that this is a lie, the idea is that when you have a scorecard and you're keeping records of all the rights and wrongs in your relationships, you're never going to get from person A to person B. You're just never going to get there. So I think you have to surrender that scorecard and be willing to take steps, even if it's uncomfortable, and past the point of where you think it's comfortable. And ultimately, I think most people can do that, and they do it to this place where they're like, okay, I've come all this way. Now I want you to meet me in the middle. Like they think I've gone halfway. Now you go halfway. And one of the things I like to say is that halfway is actually where relationships go to die. When I go halfway, I'm assuming that you need to go halfway. But I just for you personally, think about a relationship where there's been a lack of trust, but you feel like you've gone halfway. Do you think that it's at all possible that the other person thinks that they've gone halfway?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've gone halfway in your mind, but you didn't ask them where they thought they've been. But they're sitting over there thinking they've gone halfway. And here you have a mile of distance in between the two of you. And so at that point, when you get to halfway and you say, I'm done, you kind of cross your arms and say, all right, I've gone this far. I'm not going to go any further till you meet me halfway. That's when that relationship starts to die. And I think that the most vulnerable, the most courageous, the best step that you ever take in a relationship that has tension around it is when you take that first step past halfway, that first step past where I don't feel like I want to take this step anymore, but I know I need to take it. You don't take all of them, but you just take that first one. And that's an effort for you, not for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And when I hear you talk about this, like the first argument against it, if I were to have one, would be like, basically what would you say if I feel like I'm giving someone my full trust, but they aren't doing the same? That relationship obviously isn't going to work out. And like you say in the book, that whether or not you trust someone and whether or not they trust you are both your responsibility.
Yeah.
And so could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's backwards, isn't it? It's not part of our human nature, and it requires a real sacrifice on our part to the relationship. Now, I'm going to give a couple caveats here. One caveat, and this is really, really important, and that is the assumption that you want this relationship to work, that you need this relationship to work. Because if you don't, or it's not important to you, then everything we're going to talk about here doesn't really matter. You have a different strategy for dealing with people you don't care to deal with. This is the relationship with, you're living next to someone as a neighbor and you want things to work out well. You're dating someone and you want it to work out well. You have a boss or a coworker and you want that to work out well. So, this idea that you're going to be responsible for your part of the journey, but then you're not responsible for how they respond. You're responsible for how you react to how they respond. And I think that, creating this idea of how could this look? What could good look like is really important, because not every relationship is designed, nor will it end up being ideal or perfect.
So like when you go halfway in a relationship and you don't feel like the other side has gone halfway and it starts to fizzle out and you don't feel like that trust is building, like how would you go about, at what point do you say you need to move on from that relationship? Or at what point do you keep pursuing and keep hoping that they take the same steps you've taken?
Yeah, such a wise question, because that's really the question is not should I move forward? The question is, at what point do I stop moving forward? And so here, a couple bits of research. Research has been done multiple different times and places, and they have determined that when people get to the halfway point and then they end a relationship, whether it's a marriage, a friendship, a dating relationship, a work relationship, whatever it is, 66%, 2/3 of people, when they were asked if you were able to take another step forward once you got to that halfway point instead of ending the relationship, how many of you think that this relationship could have continued? And 2/3 of the people who already ended a relationship, when they're looking back, say, yeah, if I would have been willing to take a step, it probably could have continued. Now, it might not have continued forever. So I believe in necessary endings. I believe relationships should end. And I believe in boundaries around relationships so that, you don't, I'm not talking about, again, just blindfold walking in and taking all the arrows and problems in a relationship. So at that halfway point, the first thing I would say is, number one, take 2 steps more than you feel comfortable. And one of those steps might be just sending a text message saying, hey, I'm really frustrated with how our conversation went last week. Can we talk about it? That might be a step. A step might be walking to someone and saying, I didn't represent myself well. I got heated, frustrated, and said things I regret. Can we talk about that? Or a step might just be offering forgiveness to that person without even telling them. Just little steps towards are important. And if you take some incremental steps, then you might find that things are different. The other is, there's this idea where we deceive ourselves, and we deceive ourselves by thinking we have to think badly about the other person in order to justify our actions and our behaviors. So we have thoughts, actions, behaviors around other people. And in order for us not to be, humiliated for having those thoughts and actions, we have to double down on saying what I thought was right and my behaviors were right. And so we deceive ourselves, and we just continually put ourselves in a loop like that. So one of the things that we can do in that halfway point is get ourselves out of that deception by thinking differently about the other person. The majority of people we interact with don't wake up with the intention to hurt us. They don't wake up with the intention to do untrustworthy things. It's oftentimes how we perceive that.
So it's like the simple idea of putting yourself in the other person's shoes can a lot of times, give you a better idea of where they're coming from. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think
so. I'm also curious, like when you're
thinking?
Right. When you're working with teams and dealing with maybe situations where there's low trust or people aren't willing to give trust or don't see the value in that, like what are some of the most popular arguments people have against the idea? Like what do you hear most often?
Of why people don't trust?
Yeah, of why people are reluctant to give trust.
Yeah. Well,
why they would want to keep score, like they would rather make you earn it.
Yeah. Well, one is it's safe in their mind. It's safer for them. If they don't ever take a risk, they're never going to get burned. Right. So taking those steps to one another and going past halfway, you have a chance of something bad happening and it not feeling good. And so one of the main reasons why people don't offer trust is because in their mind, it's safer. It's like, okay, no, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I'm just going to keep a boundary. Another reason why they do that is because they have I don't know that they have a God complex, but they have this idea that they're the ones that get to determine your value, and they're the ones that get to determine what gets into their circle, and they're not willing to be vulnerable and open, and they're afraid to be courageous. And so, a lot of this is really just fear-based and to try and protect yourself. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. We often will look at people's stories and find out, in your history, where have you been burned and where have you been hurt and where have you been frustrated? And a lot of times our past experiences follow through with us for so much of our life, and we start applying a pain or a frustration or a hurt or an embarrassment that we had years ago to someone in the future that doesn't look, act, or feel like that, but we just carry that protection around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the idea of you have to go into every new relationship with fresh eyes and, not being naive to what you've gone through in the past, but also not holding these people hostage to, experiences that you've dealt with in the past. I also want to ask, like, at what degree should you pay attention to someone's right and wrongs? Not necessarily keep score, because if you're always keeping score, they're never going to win. But I personally feel like it would be a little naive to say that we shouldn't pay attention at all to when someone wrongs us, So how would you say, like, you can do that and be aware of it without being like naive and also without keeping score? Is there a middle ground there where you're being smart, but also giving them your trust?
Well, okay, let me give an analogy before I answer that. You're driving down the freeway, you got 4 lanes of traffic, everybody's going 80 miles an hour. And, because there's this general rule of the road where you expect everyone's following the same rules of the road, you feel good. You put your blinker, you turn, you pass someone, they pass you. You don't expect someone's going to come running into you. Then you see a car that's a bit erratic. They're not using their blinker. They're froggering in and out of cars. I'm going to pay attention to that person and say, there's something there that maybe they're not following the rule of the road, and I'm going to protect myself from that. Or I can see red lights up in front of me. There's something that's like warning me, hey, traffic's going to be slowing down, so I'm going to take extra caution. I think that's prudent. And I think the same thing can be applied to our personal relationships. We're all such dynamic people, and, we can't even predict what we're going to do. You can't predict how I'm going to be in the afternoon, let alone how I am in the morning all the time, let alone, the 100 other relationships you have. So I think when you start seeing things that are out of character or that could be area for concern, then what you're doing is you're prudently paying attention to that versus, okay, you really screwed up over here. In your situation, you're on a team, you've got teammates, or you've been in school projects. You're getting put in a school project with 2 people. And if you each need to put a third of effort in to put up 100% of the effort, you can't just assume that they're going to do that. If all of a sudden they're showing along the way that they're not putting effort in, you might have to go above and beyond, or you might have to protect yourself so that you don't fail the class because someone's not holding up their end of the bargain. So I think you're right. It wouldn't be wise to just blindly go and offer trust. But also I think that you have to ask yourself, am I just being prudent in paying attention to what's around me, or am I really keeping score? Because there's a big difference between the two. When we keep score, we're right. We're in our minds, it's a record of all the rights, all the wrongs. And not only are we keeping a record of theirs, we're actually keeping a record of ours at the same time. And so we have this balance, and it's like, I'm doing much more good than they're doing good. And so you start to put yourself in this tension with the other person when you're truly keeping score versus you're just prudently paying attention. And then just one last thing is I mentioned it before around the halfway point. There are times when we need to put boundaries around relationships where there might be an individual that telling them all that you want to, all of your secrets isn't smart because they can't keep them, right? But it doesn't mean you can't trust them. It just means there's certain things I'm not going to tell them. But with the other areas of my relationship, I can go all in. So, compartmentalizing some of these things. And one of the things I see when people really struggle in their relationships is that they have an all or nothing mindset. They think that someone is all good or all bad, when in reality, none of us are all good and absolutely none of us are all bad. And we have to pay attention to that and be mindful of how we respond to people, or how we basically how we judge people based on that good bad factor.
Yeah, no, that's all really helpful. I think the biggest thing, tell me if this is right. I feel like the difference between truly keeping score and just paying attention is when we're keeping score, it's almost like the wrongs hold more weight than the right. And, like a wrong action that someone does, like you say, like someone does something good, you take one step forward, but something bad, you take two steps back. And in
That's
that
right.
case, you're never going to get there.
That's
So,
absolute. That's so good. That's right. Yep.
and then I also want to talk about the idea of conflict, because even in a trustful relationship, you're going to run into conflict, and talk about why conflict is better and more productive when it happens from a place of trust.
Well, I think every relationship has conflict. It's just some of it doesn't get exposed. So in every relationships that is important, there's some level of conflict. And so if you start out, like, just think about trust as the foundation, and think about your relationship as the house you're building on the foundation. And so you don't have to be a geologist or a civil engineer to understand that a strong foundation will allow you to build a taller, bigger house. And if you have that foundation of trust, then you're going to be more willing to be benevolent with someone, or you're going to be more able to receive the benevolence of someone. And so a lot of times people think of conflict when people are asked, what do you think about conflict? The vast majority of people think it's a bad thing. And actually, it's unhealthy conflict that's the bad thing. Healthy conflict is a really good thing. If I would, if I could have my way, we would have more unhealthy conflict, because it allows us to have greater intimacy, to grow in ourselves. It goes back to that innovation and risk and courage and all of that. It allows all of that to grow. But what we have is a society where the majority of our problems today are centered around an unhealthy conflict. And just to clarify the difference, unhealthy conflict is you and I are no longer willing to see each other's point of view. And I feel like I have to win and you have to lose. That's unhealthy. But healthy conflict is we just have a difference of opinion. And because of that difference of opinion, we can strengthen our own difference of opinion. It doesn't mean that we're actually going to even agree with one another, but we are willing to see each other's point of view and to understand where each other's coming from and respect each other because of that difference of opinion. And we need more of that and less of the unhealthy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it all goes back to this idea of assuming others' best interests. I think in unhealthy conflict, you're assuming that, you're having this argument and you assume that they're out to get you, and that they want nothing to deal with you and they want to defeat you. Whereas when you're assuming that, like, they just have a different perspective and they want this thing to work out just like you do, it really changes the way that you approach that conflict.
Yeah.
So
One phrase that I've used a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to share a phrase I've used a lot, and I learned this. I think it was a marriage retreat. I've said this to your mom, my wife, a bunch of times, and she said it to me, and that is, I am not your enemy. You get into this place where you're frustrated and you're having challenge, and you feel like you're fighting, and it's like, well, time out. I'm not your enemy. I'm actually I'm not just your friend. I'm like your best friend. And so if I was your enemy, I would be, what you're thinking about me right now or what I'm thinking about you would be true. But we need to realize, and I think that's something I would tell everyone to think about when you're struggling with conflict is, wait a minute, this person's not my enemy. They want the best for me and I want the best for them.
Yeah, that's so good. So such a simple reminder, but like if you think of that in whenever you're dealing with conflict, I think I'm definitely going to use that moving forward. I'm not your enemy, or assuming that even if they don't say it, they're not my enemy, Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we could talk all day long just on these first few chapters. And so it gets me excited to dive in more and more as I keep reading the book. But I think this has been a great general intro into the idea of trust and why it's so important to give people trust and not make them earn it. But I want to close out with a dad advice segment is what we're going to call it. Kind of a little more applying this to real life, specifically for young people. So one question that I had and like some of my friends had around the idea of trust is specifically in like dating relationships. When you're first getting to know someone, does this apply to that as well? Should you fully give them your trust right away? And if so, how will this help the relationship flourish and develop in a healthy way?
Well, okay. Answer is yes. Everyone deserves your trust. And even if they show characteristics or behaviors or actions that that are counter to that, it's still worth it, because I can absolutely not trust you and wait for you to do a bunch of good things and then start trusting you. Or I can start with my ideology here and have open heart, open trust, open confidence and clarity, and then find out later that that wasn't worth it. I think those two, one way outweighs the other. However, it is important to understand that when I'm talking about trust, I'm not talking about all or nothing. A lot of times people treat trust like a football game or a baseball game where there's a winner and a loser. It's all there or it's not. And so there is a continuum of trust. And so based on a dating relationship, the trust model that we use is a three-legged stool. And trust is built on someone's integrity, their competence, and their compassion. So, when I'm looking at, do I trust someone? I'm looking, do they have integrity? Do they do the right things? Do they honor their commitments? Competence. Are they able to, grow and gain new knowledge and experience and pass that on to other people? And then compassion. Do they care about me and others and themselves? And so we're not just talking about trust like, can I give you my bank account numbers? I'm looking at those three areas, and I'm looking, what's my confidence in each of those areas? So in a dating relationship, we go straight to the compassion. It's like, do you care about me? Do I care about you? But I'm also looking at competence. Are we in this for the same reason? Does dating mean the same thing to you as it means to me? And do you have that level of competence in a relationship to be a good partner in a relationship? And then integrity is not just, are you truthful, but are you the same person? Do I see you out at the club and you're one person? I see you Sunday at church and you're a different person. And in the middle of the week at work, you're a totally different person. That's not necessarily high integrity. So I think in all of our relationships, whether we believe it or not, or know it or not, you're looking through the lens of those three things. And so I think the question, should you trust someone in a dating relationship? I think you should always be careful about, am I giving my heart completely over to a person? That's different than, can I be vulnerable, open, and be courageous in how I approach the relationship, sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think absolutely yes, because if you can't do it at the beginning, how do you feel like you're ever going to get to it at some other point?
Yeah, that's so good. And I like the idea of breaking it down into the three-legged stool: compassion, competence, and integrity. I think it's easy to right away think it is an all or nothing thing, but it isn't necessarily. So next, what do you do when you are taken advantage of? And I mean, I think we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but like, is it possible to give someone full trust after they've significantly wronged you? And how do you kindly tell someone you feel like you can't trust them anymore?
Okay, so this is where the three-legged stool comes into mind. In this category, I want you to take the word trust completely out of your vocabulary, because if you tell me, I don't know if I can trust you, like if you said, "Hey, Dad, I don't know if I can trust you," that automatically puts some tension, some barriers, some walls in our conversation, and maybe even in our relationship. But if you come to me and say, "Dad, I'm really struggling because I know I read it in texts, I read it in notes, I've heard you say it before that you care for me, but the last 3 times that we had an argument, it didn't look that way. So your integrity of what you say and what you do is different. And you talk to me about my integrity or my competence. It's like, hey, you told me you were going to do X, Y, and Z, but you didn't do it. Or you didn't follow through with that. Or compassion. It's like, gosh, I know what you're saying is right, but how you're saying it is so hurtful. Like, if you can narrow it down to 1, 2, or 3 of those categories of where the trust issue is, then you know better how to deal with it. So, it's not that you're going to just go give someone your full trust when they've wronged you. You're going to do 1 of 2 things. You're going to go and confront them directly and talk to them. And that can be, to offend someone could be the greatest gift you ever give them or yourself. And, we're in this highly offendable, everyone's, just so, I mean, really we're emotionally weak as a people right now, because the highest order of offense is to be cringy or to offend someone, when in fact, offending someone might be the highest order of anything you can do. And I don't mean be a jerk or be belligerent. I mean, go to them and say, hey, this happened and this didn't feel good. Or you said this, what did you mean? Or we were just in this meeting and I had an idea and you shared my idea and that didn't feel right. Like, go talk to them. That's the one thing you're going to do. Or the second thing you're going to do is you're going to stuff it and not do anything and grow resentment and anger, and it's going to build and it's going to grow. So I think that, really evaluating where is that offense and can you be willing to have the courage to go address that or alter your mind and your expectations with the person. Because there are some people that's the answer, is I just have to alter my expectations. Having full, totally wide open trust is not going to work, but within these boundaries, it will work. So what are the boundaries that you can create?
Yeah, that's so good. I think I keep hearing the importance of the language of trust. And I think, those three ideas: integrity, compassion, competence. Again, I think whenever you're going to someone about trust, instead of having this overarching all or nothing idea, I don't trust you, it's my confidence in you is lacking. Like, I feel like your integrity is lacking. I think that goes a long way and can really get to the root of the issue a lot quicker. So also, we touched on this a little bit, but are there any more practical ways to not trust ref? Because I feel like in my friendships and relationships, it is like, it's my natural. I want to do that right away. Like, think, what did they do right? What did they do wrong? What did I do right? What did they do wrong? And what are some practical ways you can kind of get that out of being a habit that we do in our relationships?
In super close relationships, ones that matter the most, roommate, coworker, family, I'm going to keep coming back to the same answer to any different question as it relates to this. And that is, have direct conversations. Have conversations with people, not about people. And so go to them and say, I'm struggling with X. I want to take the risk to do this with you or to share this with you. But let me tell you why I'm struggling with that, and let them know where those challenges are. The other is just acknowledge when you're keeping score, when you're tracking things, and there's a couple questions to ask yourself. Then is, why am I doing this? What do I benefit from keeping score right now? I've got some friends and some family members where, in my mind, I am 10-1 in the number of times I reach out to them versus they reach out to me, or the benevolence that I feel like I give to them versus they give to me. And every once in a while this pops up and I find myself trust reffing, going like, I'm doing all of these things. And, I'm the one who reaches out. I'm the one who does this. And when I catch myself doing that, I'm asking those questions. Why am I doing this? And what effect is this having on me or on them? And then I realize the person that I want to be is the type of person that maintains relationships, that always has depth in those relationships and is willing to take the risks in those relationships. And maybe I'm the person that has to give more effort than others to make them work well. And, maybe that's God's call for me, is to be that person who is the one who keeps the relationship going. Because if I drop it, they're not gonna, the relationship will fail. And maybe that's actually a blessing and a benefit versus a problem. That's the close people next to you. With people that are like acquaintances, or they're, folks that you interact with and you want to have high trust and you want to not keep score, that's a little easier. That's just, you've got to define what good can look like in those relationships and let that be your expectation, and be honest about that. And you don't have to go right every wrong. Sometimes you have to just say, this relationship is what it is, and based on how good it can be, that's my new goal and objective. And so, there's people that I work with as clients where I'm never going to have a deep, meaningful relationships. And there's things I'm going to question about their integrity or competence or compassion. But the fact is that I need to serve them and their teams and their organization well. And I'm going to give everything I can and everything I need to up to that, to within that framework. But I'm probably not going to treat it as though this is a 50-year relationship.
Yeah, that's really good. For the last question, what would you say to someone who has a lot of serious trust wounds and is having a really hard time getting over them? Someone who, maybe doesn't trust their own parents or has been burned by other family members, or have gone through serious trauma around the idea of trust. What would be your biggest encouragement to them and how to move forward in having trustful relationships?
Well, I've got some ideas around that, but I think the first thing I would say to a person like that is that I would find a reputable counselor and therapist to regularly talk through that, because the wounds of our past, they come through with us until we are able to allow them to heal or to understand them. And so it would be trite to say, do these 5 things and you're gonna be whole from that. I think that counseling and therapy is one of the greatest ways to recover from that. So really do the hard work of discovering where did those challenges come from and how are they affecting you. So that aside, a few tips that I think we can do on our own that are helpful is, one, decide what type of person do you want to be. Do you want to be a person who people respect, admire, they come to, that you are the bastion of courage, that people look at you and say, that person is a courageous person. That person is a person of honor. That person is a person who is sought after and adds value to the relationships they're in. If that's the person that you want to be, then you have to take the risks. And so really evaluate what type of person do you want to be. And then I've got a series of 3 questions to answer. The first question is, what am I telling myself right now about this? So I've got trust issues. I've got challenges. I think that things are bad. I've had bad relationships before, had bad family life. And now I'm bringing that to a current situation. Just ask myself right now, what am I telling myself about this? What am I telling myself about the person? What am I telling myself about the situation? So that's question number 1. What am I telling myself about this? The second is that true? So what am I telling myself about this situation, about my coach, my teammates, my roommates, my coworkers, my girlfriend? What am I telling myself about this, my family? And then the next question, is that true? The question isn't, is there any truth in that? The question is it true? And then the last question, after you've asked yourself, what am I telling myself? Is it true? The last question is, what is required of me right now in this relationship? Because I am the common denominator in all of my relationships. And if I look at all my relationships and I have a lot of problems and a lot of challenges, I am the only common denominator in those relationships. And so what am I telling myself? Is it true? And then what's required of me right now in this situation to improve that relationship, that circumstance? And, I think your question is, in case anyone thinks that they're the only one with that question, I think all of us have questions like that with people in our lives, if not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. It's very common. And so we got to do the hard work of looking in the mirror and asking ourselves these tough questions.
Well, I've learned so much just in this 45-minute conversation. This gets me really excited as we, continue this series together. And yeah, I'm super pumped. And if anyone listening wants to dive into more of these ideas, check out my dad's book, Trustology. And, you can read more about everything we're talking about. So anyways, thank you, Dad, for all the words of wisdom, and looking forward to part 2.
Thanks, Christian. It was a good conversation.